Well, good morning. I hope that things are going well for you today. You can kind of see that my screen is loading, hopefully. I wanted to walk you through the creation of Israel, the fall of the Ottoman Empire, Zionism, Holocaust, birth of the new country, and all of those things. So, this slide is one that I kind of enjoy, and you can go back and play that on your own. That was We. We Are Giants, and they are an incredible band, but they do a really cool job doing that video of Constantinople, Istanbul, and I think that you'll enjoy it. Well, let's get back and talk about the Ottoman Empire. So, the Ottoman Empire, absolutely a marvelous, massive empire. In the history of the world, you've got the Roman Empire, which was followed by the Byzantine Empire. When the Byzantine Empire and the Roman Empire, which were both ultimately Christian empires, when they fell, the Ottoman Empire took over, and the Ottoman Empire was a Muslim empire. However, they did just like the Byzantine Empire, and they allowed other people to practice their religion as they saw fit. So it was really important for us to study the religions as we get into this to begin discovering all of these things. Now, we start with the Ottoman Empire because we're trying to wind up with the creation of Israel in our standard and how we look at things. So the Ottoman Empire at one time was over the region that we would call Palestine that ultimately would become known as Israel. And so that's why we look at them. And the Ottoman Empire ruled for a very long time, as you can see that from 1299 to 1923 after World War I fell. So the height of its empire, it ruled all of the land, if you can get this in your mind, that surrounded the Mediterranean Sea. So it ruled all of the coastline of the Mediterranean Sea, massive amounts of land, probably a little bit larger than what you would think would be the United States of America. And so this kind of shows that. The last video you can go back and watch on your own because I shared it with you. That's on the Janissaries. The Janissaries were the fighting forces, about 6,000 strong. It was the elite fighting force. The amazing thing about them is they're former Christians that actually were either kidnapped or conscripted into the army when they were small children, 10, 12 years old, taught to be Islamic, taught to be jihadist. And it's a very fascinating story. And they were very loyal fighting force. So pretty interesting to see them. They were used in the fall of Constantinople and the transfer of power into Istanbul. Very powerful. But there you can see your map. Now, the Turks were really wealthy. They did very well in government early on with trade and taxation, and they were able to trade with their neighbors. They also have a lot to owe to them when it comes to architecture and also art. Suleiman the Magnificent, probably the apex of the Ottoman Empire, he built Istanbul into a powerhouse. And this mosque is called the Blue Mosque. It's the Mosque of Suleiman. I did share with your friends in class that I was blessed to visit this mosque when I visited Istanbul. It's absolutely beautiful on the inside, and it's blue tile work on the inside and blue carpet. So that's why it's referred to as the Blue Mosque. And so it's absolutely massive. It faces the Hagia Sophia, which was the Holy Church of Wisdom that then became a mosque and then later became a museum. Now it's a mosque again. And so in the different processes of what's going on in Istanbul, culture and religion transfer right now. Well, over time, the Ottoman sultans really weren't able to do very much. They didn't rule. They didn't very well. They didn't expand their empire very well. They didn't educate very well. And so they did not follow the processes of the Industrial Revolution, nor did they follow the processes of the Renaissance, which is kind of surprising considering who they were and what they had done early on. So when World War I broke out, the Ottoman Empire were allies with the Central Power. They were allies with Austria-Hungary. They were allies with Germany. And so they jumped in on that side of the war, trying to rule and expand their empire out from there. Really not a good idea. They actually lost. So after the war, you've got the breakup of the German Empire, breakup of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and breakup of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire were ruled, actually it's called mandates. The mandates come down after the Treaty of Versailles, meaning that this is a region or regents where the winning side will help these countries form, govern, structure themselves, and be controlled. So they're under their mandate. They're under their control or their governance. So France received Syria and Lebanon in the Middle East, and in North Africa, Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia Great Britain was over Egypt and Sudan, or if you will, the Nile countries of Egypt, and then Jordan and Palestine in the Middle East, and Italy oversaw Libya, which is in North Africa as well. So kind of give you a picture of this here on this slide so you can tell where they're at with the British control. Now, this was important because, again, we're going to get to the British here in a minute. The British made some promises to the Arabs and the Jews about land that they would give and land that they would provide. So these borders that were set up, that map that we looked at, they were set up coming out of the San Remo Agreement to not really be concerned about religious or ethnic background, but they were thinking about what they wanted to rule. So it was kind of to make an agreement with the Triple Entente and how they wanted to govern the New World. Well, the British were involved in that they helped, or they promised rather, the Arabs that if you help us defeat the Ottoman Empire, which they did, we're going to give you land. And so they said, we'll give you Syria to the Arabian Peninsula. The Arabs wanted more than that. They thought, no, we've done more, so we really want more than that. At the very same time, Britain was also making promises to the Jews. So in 1917, the Balfour Declaration, the written declaration, the British government promised their support for the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Now, that's known as Zionism. So they said, we're going to sign on to this, that late 1800 movement that was now gaining strength, and said, we're going to see a Palestinian state that becomes a Jewish state, or vis-a-vis becomes Israel. The Balfour Declaration is very important for us to understand in the promise. And the British ultimately did give both of their promises. They gave Palestine to the Jews. Ultimately, it took until 1948. But they also gave the Transjordan became Jordan. All of this area from Syria, Saudi Arabia, and down became Arabian lands. Now, because they took control and they ran it like a colony, the Arabs felt betrayed. They thought that that land should have been a part of their population. They were the largest population was there. Well, it makes sense. The Jews had left. They had already been dispersed. So in 1920, under the British occupation, you look at that percentage or that ratio, there's 1 Jew to every 10 Arabs, or 10%. But by 1947, the eve of Israel being a new country, there's 1 Jew to every 2 Arabs. Now, the Arabs had not left. The Jewish population had just grown that much. And so now you've got a situation where there's 50% of the population is now Jewish. So the Arabs were losing control. But the Jews who were immigrating into that land, it was creating a tension between the Arabs and Jews. And it was really creating a lot of problems and a lot of hostility between the two, because the Arabs felt like it was their land. The Jews felt like it was their land. But again, under Zionism, the Jews said, this is our homeland. This is historic. So we asked the question, who really owns the land? Who is it that should have ownership of the land? During this time, because of the problems going on between the Arabs and the Jews, there was anti-Semitism growing. Also, now we've got World War II that breaks out, so you've got anti-Semitism happening there in Germany and spreading around the world. But at the same time, during this same time period, and even during World War I, tens of thousands of Jews are moving to Palestine. They're coming from Europe, they're coming from America, they're coming from other places, and they're moving back to Israel, what would become Israel, moving back to Palestine. So the Jews say this is our land. They connect back. Now think about this. It actually dates back to 4,000 years ago. So according to the law, according to the Torah, that's again, when we study the religion, we learn in the law process that Abraham was told by Yahweh to leave Mesopotamia and go to a land that he would give to him, which was the land of Canaan, or what is present day Israel. And Abraham was able to receive that land. He purchased much of the land. So much of what we have today is Abraham's land. Now, here's the thought. Abraham, in the legal records, never sold the land. Abraham never gave away the land. So if a landowner dies, when they die, who gets their land? Well, it's their family gets their land. So the Jews have a legal right to the land because they are the family of Abraham. So their claim to the land goes back to that process, to that point. They say, we own that land. They also argue that they didn't leave the land on their own choosing, their own volition, but in fact, they were forced out by Roman persecution in 70 CE when the diaspora happened, when the temple was destroyed, and then when they began to scatter the people all across the known world. One of the reasons they did that is the Jewish leaders at that time were pushing against the Roman leadership. And Rome had all they could take. Honestly, they were in control, so they kind of scattered it. This also helped because at the same time, Christianity began to spread rapidly throughout the Roman Empire. And so it was interesting how that process happened. So in the vacuum, when the Jews left, the Arabs in the area, they simply moved into the land. They moved into the empty land. So we fast forward to World War II. We know about the Holocaust and the end result of anti-Semitism. Well, not the end result, but a result of anti-Semitism is Holocaust. But one of the results of the Holocaust was the fact that, and it's a positive result, is that there was a movement then to establish and create a Jewish homeland. So that is what's going on. In 1947, Great Britain asked the United Nations to help divide up the land and to offer and to give to the Jews their homeland. So the United Nations, most of the world at that point, felt like that it was right to create a Jewish state in Palestine because of the suffering in the Holocaust. So, it's kind of a positive result that came out of a very, very bad situation. The Jews agreed to the terms. They said, yes, we want it. The Arabs in the area said, no, we're going to do everything possible to prevent the Jews from having their own homeland. So on May the 14th, 1948, Israel becomes a state. They become their own nation. That very night, 7 Arab nations, the neighbors, attacked Israel to keep them from becoming a state. Now, Israel ultimately won this fight, but it took a while. So if you look at that, 7 neighboring states, and you can see who they are, they attacked Israel, but Israel defended themselves. And over an 8-month period of time, they not only defended their land, they also expanded their territory and they got more land.
Teachers, just a reminder, we will not.
All right, so in the process, you heard Ms. Sigler, wasn't that a great announcement? So in the process, the Jews defended themselves, but they also received the Palestinian land. Well, in order to get peace, they made peace with their neighbors and they gave some of that land to them. But in the process of giving the land to them, here's what's really interesting. The Palestinians that were living there, they didn't get anything. So it created a situation where there's 780,000 refugees who were displaced, so they had nowhere else to go. Now, some of them moved to what would be called the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. And in fact, Israel has even said to this day, the Palestinian Arabs that live there, if they are in Gaza or they're in the West Bank, if they'll live with peace, they can have a sense of homeland. They can have different lands in Israel today. So you look at some of the causes and effects of the Israeli conflict. You're going to notice that the Ottoman Empire, it fell apart right here. When it fell apart, the British took control. Zionist support at that time for the creation of the State of Israel. The British agreed. They formed Israel. Conflict broke out between Arabs and Jews. The Arabs were displaced in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Now, here's what's wild. A lot of politicians, even in our day today in 2020, say that it's not possible to have peace between the Arabs and the Jews as long as the Palestinians don't have their own country, as long as they don't have their own state. A lot of people have rejected that and said, no, there can be peace. So the current administration has been working toward having peace, and they have been working toward establishing a peace. And you can see even on this timeline, there is a historic conflict between Israel and between the Arab world. So we have a lot of that. But recently, as September the 15th, the Abraham Accords were signed between 2 Arab nations, the United Arab Emirates and Israel, Bahrain and Israel. And they said that we're going to have peace, and they're not asking for any land. That's what's kind of cool. So look at all of these things that they agreed to: investments, tourism, direct flights, security, telecommunications, technology, energy, healthcare. You can see that list. Well, it's continued to grow. So now we've got peace between 2 Arab nations and Israel. October the 23rd, this past Saturday, of course, if you're watching this, it may not be this past Saturday, but October the 23rd, 2020, Sudan in North Africa agreed to peace with Israel. Now, this is huge. This is what they're trying to work out. So you can see the things they're trying to work out. They haven't finished it yet, but they're going to do this. This is their ultimate goal. What's cool about this is that Khartoum, Sudan, the capital of Sudan, was the city and the place that was motivating a lot of hatred between Israel and the Arab world of the Arab states and nations. That's where they would meet and sign agreements against Israel. Well, now that country that was anti-Israel is now becoming in an alliance with Israel for peace. This is an absolute unprecedented time. And so good time to be alive and some cool things that are happening in the Israeli and Arab world. Well, fast forwarding in, or actually rewind to fast forward. So the United States has been concerned. We've been in this area for a long time. We have support of Israel. That has angered a lot of Arabs over the time because of that. And so you go back and see some of our involvement. In 1990, Iraq attacked Kuwait. You can see the reasons why. But the problem was Kuwait belonged to the United Nations. When the UN voted to support Kuwait against Iraq, the United States led the charge with 39 other countries. We supported Iraq. Now, this is known as the Persian Gulf War or Operation Desert Storm, and it only lasted for 3 months because we liberated Kuwait. We did not go into, well, we did go into Iraq, but we did not overthrow Saddam Hussein in Iraq. The picture there is the then president, George Herbert Walker Bush, who was president during that time. Very successful that we were able to go in and we were able to liberate them. Now, we didn't realize in the United States we were at war with Al-Qaeda, who is a jihadist group from the Muslim world. You may know of, I'm sure you know of the 9/11 attacks. So we were attacked in 2001 by Al-Qaeda, was a group from Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden, who was a Saudi Arabian prince living in Afghanistan, helped finance and also plan that terrorist attack. He ultimately was assassinated by the U.S. Navy SEALs in May of 2011. If you read the I Am Malala book with us, it talked about our presence in Afghanistan at the time when Malala was shot. That's why we were there. We were looking for Osama bin Laden during that time. Well, support for Al-Qaeda as far as trying to get them, we thought that Iraq was supporting Al-Qaeda. They had developed nuclear weapons, or at least they had weapons of mass destruction. It led the United States to invade in 2003. It was called Operation Iraqi Freedom. We were able to overthrow and unseat the dictator Saddam Hussein. We ultimately gave him to their government. They tried him for crimes against their people. He was executed. They executed him. But we've still had some problems. We didn't have an exit strategy. We developed one later. We're now out of Iraq and we're at other things. Well, that kind of ends where we're at. This is kind of a double-sided picture, but I've given it to you. You've got a sequence of events that you can go through and see the creation of Israel and where it's at. Kind of play with it. The top one's 1. Actually, the bottom one is number 2. And you can fill out the rest in between. Hope that gives you a picture and a snapshot. This has been fun. This has been real. Hope it's been real fun for you as well. Thanks.